Ever wonder if there is more to health than just counting calories? Or maybe you scroll through countless posts asking the question, is intermittent fasting really worth the hype? Welcome, my friends. This is Optimal Health Talk by Dr. Obinna. And today we are going to dive into the most powerful and often misunderstood tools in human history. And as a medical doctor and lifestyle physician, it is one of the things I found fascinating because this is not just another trendy diet hack. Intermittent fasting is a practice that is not just woven into our DNA, it is woven into our spirituality. It has won a Nobel Prize in 2016, the science behind it. And in this episode, what I am going to do to follow the same mantra that knowledge is the beginning of healing. Because if you know the hows and the whys, then the action becomes very easy. And then we will explore how this very ancient spiritual ritual hold the key to our modern healing. I will expound on the factors that I believe that you need to know, which is that intermittent fasting is what is engraved in the Lenten season, the Ramadan, the Jewish Yom Kippur, and of course, why Buddhist monks have to stay away from food over a period of time. So in this part one, we are going to be looking at what are those evolutionary and scientific foundations of intermittent fasting. So watch out for part two, because it's in part two that we are now going to tackle on what really is intermittent fasting and how can it be used to prevent as well as reverse disease. So first, let's uncover the truth behind intermittent fasting. It has hit the internet so hard in the past almost 5 years, I believe, and everybody talks about intermittent fasting, but I don't know how many people understand what it's all about. I want you to picture this: 200,000 years ago, we dropped out of the sky. You could say that because genetic understanding now shows that humans are very different. The point where in the evolutionary tree humans came is not what was originally thought. But let's say it's 200,000 years ago. Our ancestors were strolling, foraging the forest. They were looking through the forest. They were not pressing their buttons to get DoorDash or Uber Eats. So they ate what they got, from hunting down mammoths to eating fruits and vegetables. So they had periods in which they had feasts. They had all the animals, and then they had periods in which they had the famine, which brought about by weather conditions and other things. There was a feast and famine cycle that was our ancestors knew about. Feast famine cycle was over time by epigenetics engraved in their genes. So the ones who eventually survived that were who natural selection had brought out to become us. So we are the ones who have those genes that could survive the fast and feast cycle that is now known as a genetic blueprint in humans. So buckle up, because we are going to embark on a fascinating journey today. We are going to talk about some of those genetic conditions that have brought about this buzz, intermittent fasting. As a young medical student, I have always been fascinated by what is it that makes our body work in the harmony called homeostasis in physiology. Our body is a perfect machine. I knew that as a medical student, and that has driven me to where I am today. So you're going to buckle up and we're going to talk about this. In 1962, a young man, a geneticist called James Newell, proposed that there were genes in our body that has been helping us to store fat when we are feasting, when we are eating well, when we're in abundance. It was what eventually will save us in periods of famine when we didn't have anything. So fast forward to today, he was so ingenious in 1962 to have thought about this. And that was just after Watson and Crick discovered DNA. What has happened is that we are now drawn, we are almost literally drawn in feasts. Very few areas in the world where you still have people who go into famine. But this is what is going on. We are constantly storing fat. Those thrifty genes that we were made to have, depending on the fast and famine cycle, those thrifty genes are screaming, store fat. Constantly, our body is storing the fat, waiting for the famine season, which is not coming. And that's what the epidemic obesity is all about. What I want to open our eyes today is I want you to look back a little bit because there are some that are very close to us. I come from a part of Africa, a tribe called the Igbo. I know about our eating habits growing up. Or have you heard about the Pima Indians? It is one of those the original Indian tribes that survived in the harshest conditions in Arizona deserts. And their lives in those days was intertwined with an unforgiving desert conditions and landscape that made it difficult for them to have the same type of feast that we are having today. But fast forward, we are now seeing stark example of the devastating consequence of this dietary shift, because in the same people who thrived for hundreds and hundreds of years in those environments did not have cancers, did not have diabetes. Fast forward today, their body have begun to adapt. Their genes have begun to feed on the same environmental conditions where food that was scarce and where physical activity was necessary. Their bodies are now adapting to these thrifty gene conditionalities that enable them to store this fat. And this is what has happened in their 21st century children. With the influx of refined carbohydrates, sugar-rich drinks, and traditional American diet have replaced the ones that were low in those carbs, but high in the phytoproteins that were provided by plants. This sudden shift have programmed them that you are now seeing metabolic conditions like diabetes, obesity, and of course cancer in the same Indians. Fasting is not a punishment. We now realize why it is thought to be a spiritual ritual. I want to say this clearly. Those of us who understand now why fasting was included in the spiritual and, of course, the health habits and rituals of most ancient religions. It is mimicking this ancestral eating pattern that we want to do today. You are not hacking. Don't call it any hack. You are not hacking into your biology. You are coming home to it because that was originally what it was supposed to be. Now, let's shift gears a little bit from the genes to the genius of the spiritual kind we are talking about, that every major religious body on earth, from Islam to Hinduism, somehow have included fasting and weaved it into the fabric of their belief systems. As we are talking today, we are in the Lenten season of Christianity. About the same time, you have the Ramadan, that millions of Muslims from around the world, from dusk to dawn, cultivate this period of gratitude of the time they feasted. And they also include discipline, that they are able to hold back their body from continuously feasting. The same thing Christians do. The Christians will give up their indulgence for 40 days, and just like Jesus Christ, the Lord and Savior of Christians, who went into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. And the Jewish tradition of Yom Kippur, stayed for 24 hours, seeking atonement for their sins. And then the Buddhist monks, from time to time, will go into a period where they sharpen their mindfulness by detaching from everything that is earthly, including feeding. Is that coincidence? Do we really think that this is coincidence? It is not coincidental, because we now understand that the rituals they share is that less is more. The less food you eat, the more clarity you have, the less distractions you get, and of course, the more you are connected to the greater cosmic scheme. Because if you understand how the science, which I'm going to slowly expound, influence the brain, and knowing that the brain is the radio transmitter of human being on earth with the greater cosmic scheme, we know that the Nobel Prize of Physics in 2022 was won on quantum entanglement. And quantum entanglement, for the first time, I began to see the interconnectivity of the quantum field of everything that belongs in the universe. We are part of this universe, and we are part of that cosmic scheme. So these religious bodies knew this. So the philosophers of our time, because of the deep wisdom they possess, they knew this. So Socrates, for instance, was said to have said that it is bad men that live to eat, but good men eat to live. So what goes into your mouth, which is another mantra of the School of Healthy Lifestyle, which is the mouth, muscle, and mind. That's the 3 M's of health. Everything that comes into your mouth is very important to the outcome of your health. So it turns out that fasting is not just about this quiet piety of Christians and, of course, all religious bodies. But it is a primal pragmatism that all ancient religions have come to know. They intuitively tap into what science is now beginning to prove. And this is what is important to know. They are correct. They are right. They know more than we do about us and our relationship with not just ourselves, but with the external environment. So that is why this young man from in 2016, his name is Yoshinori Oshumi. He won the Nobel Prize of Medicine and Physiology, and then the science that tells us about it all, the science of autophagy. In our autophagy, if you want to understand what it really, really means, it's a Greek word, auto. Auto means self, and phagos means eating. It sounds gruesome, right? But it's not that gruesome. Because here's where it gets fascinating. It's so fascinating because when you look at this guy and what he did to find out that our body have this intricate capacity just based on the same thrifty genes, we are now beginning to discover the connections. That these same thrifty genes, we are related to a gamut of very beautiful orchestrated genetic pool that create metabolic pathways in our body. That when you fast for between 12 to 36 hours, cells don't just panic. They don't panic. They throw a molecular house party. Guess who are the guests? These same metabolites I'm talking about and the genetics of it. So I want to tell you again, I want to emphasize on autophagy. I love autophagy. I tell people that autophagy and epigenetics won Nobel Prize of Medicine in 2012, and autophagy won Nobel Prize of Medicine in 2016. And both of them, if you look at them and look at the pure science behind them, of course, you begin to understand why lifestyle medicine is about the only hope. I'm going to say this clearly again. Epigenetic modifications, if you understand it from its purest form, is the basis in which lifestyle modifications can make you live longer, because inherently inbuilt in us are the genes that should make us live as long as we can. And that is what epigenetics exposed to us. Using the same concept that our body have this, just like the reptiles do, the snakes will shed off their skin to rejuvenate their body. We have the intricate capacity to self-clean. And I want to connect it again to those of us who are a little broad-minded. I want you to think about the circadian rhythm. If you understand the circadian rhythm of our universe, the way the things are, they go into rhythm. The sun comes out, our earth is tilted in a way that it does not hurt us. But when it comes out, by the time the photons, the energy of the sun hits the human brain, the cell body of the pineal gland, which is the receptor site, the antenna of our brain, they sense the reduction in the number of photons hitting the body, and the sun begin to recede, and then they begin to convert tryptophan, another amino acid. Tryptophan is now converted by just removal of a few hydrogen and oxygen molecules into melatonin in our brain. And that's where the magic begins to happen. Melatonin will begin to quieten down every neuronal transportation, every neuronal inscriptions, and then slowly the orbicularis oculi, one of the smallest muscles in the body, is the last to go down. And at that time, the only things that will be left functioning are the systems that have been put in place for us. This process I've just mentioned activates a secondary system that will now go to work. If you've been in big offices, that's what happens. Hospitals, big offices. Once everybody goes, guess who will begin to work? The engineers begin to look at the computers, make sure the computers are set right for the next day. The cleaners begin to clean, look at the toilets, the floor. They begin to clean out every mess. They're in the offices in perfect order, preparing for the next day. That's what happens in our body. Over the next 10 to 12 hours, the body is put into the mode of cleaning. And then as the sun begins to rise after 10 to 12 hours, we now understand the reason why that happens is that we are sleeping, we are not eating, we are in fasting mode. And then at that time, the sun begins to rise again, the photons begin to increase, and then the pineal gland picks it up. What does it do? The pineal gland now accepts a couple of hydrogen atoms to form another very important hormone, neurotransmitter that's called serotonin. And serotonin, with the supraoptic chiasma sensing these photons, will begin to produce that wakeful moment. And that's when we wake up. But this is where it gets very interesting, because as the squad of these genes and these proteins are playing around, there is a squad, special squad that is waiting in the wings, waiting for that moment. It is those genes that we inherited from our ancestors. So let me introduce you to that squad. The cleanup squad that we inherited from our ancestors. Let me introduce you. The first one, if you know aging researchers like David Sinclair or Walter Longo, in laboratories around the world, from Harvard to Groningen in Netherlands, they are identifying groups of longevity molecules that can only be activated, at least from research. This group of genes are the ones that are intended to make us live longer and optimize all the epigenetic potentials that will prevent some of these chronic diseases that we have today. That's the way I can put it. We look at one group that is called the twins. I call them the longevity masterpiece. They are the Michelangelo or some of those musical giants in the past. What they do is that they create this beautiful orchestrated repairing our DNA. They sculpture their way around it, and they begin to turn around the proteins to present the ones that are good for replication and, of course, translation and formation of proteins. What they do is that when you are not eating, our body begins to think that it is necessary to optimize these cells, and it activates these sirtuins. And these sirtuins, they ramp up a group of molecules in the body called the NADs. They are the ones, these molecules are basically like an espresso shot, a coffee, high content coffee shot to the cells, and it activates them, rejuvenate them, and slow the aging clock. It is the aging process. If you look at what another guy called Cortez had done in the past, we call the hallmarks of aging, you realize that the hallmarks of aging, from epigenetic changes that to genomic mistakes that happen during the process of aging, to stem cell depletions, to telomere shortening due to lack of telomerase. If you look at all of those, they are things that generally tend to make some of us not likely going to live more than 120 years. But if you optimize them, we have the capacity to live that long. So the cellular rejuvenation is triggered by fasting, which in itself triggers this group's longevity minstrels that I call the twins. I know that it is a group of researchers on some of these molecules, and if you see some of the things that they have found out about the aging process, it will amaze you. The next group of molecules called mTOR simply starts because there's this molecule called rapamycin, which was originally used in giving people to stop them from rejecting transplant. Rapamycin was found to actually make people live very long. It is still in the laboratory phase. Nobody is using it officially. However, we know that it has the potential from all the 1.5 millennia of genetic pool that has been done. It is shown to improve the markers of aging. And so mTOR, which is the mechanistic targets of rapamycin, that's what this group of genes are called. When you are feasting, mTORs, these groups are shouting, they keep building. They build new cells, they build new molecules, they build everything. They are building. But during fasting, it shuts down, and there will be no more construction noise. And so what it tells all his crew now, hello guys, it's no longer time to build. You better slow down. We are going to clean up. Let's clean up. Just like in every construction, you begin to clean up. And so fasting actually down regulates mTOR. And when you down regulate mTOR, what you now do is to trigger the cleanup process of autophagy. Then another group are called AMPK. AMPKs are the same group of what I would call the energy detectives. They are the ones that sense when we are eating too much and producing a lot of energy. So they tend to help our cells think before it acts. It wants to know. It's like a switch. Is this guy in the feasting mode or is he in the fasting mode? If he is in the feasting mode, recycle. And when he is now in the thrifty mode, where you are fasting, then it will now boost autophagy to begin to burn all the things that were stored originally for energy. We think one of the molecules that is being looked at in the future is already on your shelves, and people who have diabetes are taking metformin is a fast mimicking molecule. In fact, that is why metformin is not just used for diabetes. It is a cleaning agent. It triggers autophagy. And that's how it works. That's why it's not just for diabetes, it's used for all the other things, including PCOS and other metabolic conditions that need cleaning up of the sensitivity to the hormones. So metformin is a molecule that actually fast mimics and trigger the formation 5-AMPK. So it is very important to understand that these molecules are all triggered when we are not eating. The other one are FOXO. FOXO are resistant gurus. I call them the stress response gurus because they are the ones that it is when your body is under stress, which is called hormesis. If you put our body under pressure, means stress intentionally, it causes the body to have no choice but to trigger this set of genes that eventually fight this oxidative stress and put the body in a repair mode. That's why people now go to do things that will make them stressed, like going to jump into a cold water or ice water and all of that. The principle of hormesis is based on these little genes, but with fasting becomes a part of that same pressure that once the body senses that you are in that mode, it does nothing but trigger the gym membership that eventually strengthens your cells and the resilience of your cells to further stress. And that's how fasting begins to affect our immune response. And so here's the kicker. It's important that I get this a little bit out of the way. Our ancestors had this fasting ritual that didn't starve them into enlightenment. It didn't just do that. It was just the way they had interpreted it because of the feeling they had when they were fasting. And that is where the religious ritual of Ramadan, Lent, Yom Kippur, and the Buddhist fast, we believe, started. I want to say this to everybody who is watching this podcast today. I want us to all play the same thing. We play into the same agent. I want us to put on that same play button that will trigger the sirtuins, silence the mTORs, and hit the 5-MPK and trigger it to go into action, and the same thing as the FOXO. So why does this matter to us? Because I have always mentioned in my podcast that now that you understand some of the little, I try not to delve into the depth of the jargons of science. As we are in an enlightened society, people now understand a little more. But I want to make it simple as I can. Understanding that people, maybe 16-year-old, 15-year-olds who are watching this will get it a little bit more than just being the semantics of the scientific, nuances that is confusing and chaotic on the information superhighway. So that when you understand that fasting is not about not eating, it is just rewiring your genetic code. I want to say this again. When you understand that fasting isn't just about not eating, that it is deeper than that fasting is equivalent to rewiring your genetic code, then you no longer see it as a quick fix. You no longer follow the trend. It is not a hack. It is no longer just one of those hacks that you see and hear about every day online. I want to say something about that. I want everybody to not to misunderstand this, but I'm going to make a statement on some of the molecules that are being used these days, Ozempic, Majora, whatever the names are, that is doing marvelous things. These are amazing molecules and amazing drugs used for the treatment of diabetes and are doing amazing things for people with metabolic stress, with high obesity. But there is something I want to ask, that When you use something from outside in form of molecule to do something that you already have an inbuilt mechanism for, it robs you of that feeling of fulfillment. I want to stop there. Why do we then want to use a quick fix when you can do something that will just be a lifestyle habit that you can use forever? The research have shown that people who started Ozempic 2 years ago, 70% of them have dropped off. And about 50% of that have regained back the weight. And some of them have climbed back into the same conditions that it stopped in the first place. Is that what you really want? Or do you want something that will permanently become a part of your lifestyle, that will continuously Ozempic your metabolism? It is using your own willpower and tapping into a 200,000-year-old survival script that is written for you. The one that scrubs your cells of disease, cleans up your cells from junk that will lead to Alzheimer's, dials down your aging process, that somebody looks at you, you don't have flaps on your skin, you have a fresh looking, very, very natural looking cells. And most of all, guards you against the 4 deadly diseases we now know that are foraging our current generation. You will find out why in the next episode that I'm going to make about that it is the most potent metabolic drug. And of course, it is free. It is absolutely free. That is the moment I will drop the mic for our ancestors. Our ancestors thought they were praying. It turns out that they were biologically hacking their body into connecting to the greater powers automatically. So those of you who don't want to be spiritual, it's okay. I have put it down that I'm going to do an episode on quantum entanglement, what we understand as spirituality. There are 4 forces that govern our universe. It is the earth, depending no matter which planet you are on, where you're standing. It is fire, it is wind or air, it is water, and it is void, religious books call it. The void that we think was emptiness, we now know that it is a field that is teeming with energy, and that's what every ancient religion taps into. We will talk about it from a scientific standpoint. I want to make sure people understand that we're not going to talk about religion. We're talking about science, medical science, not just about from a scientific perspective, from a medical science, life science perspective. So what I want us to talk about and completely understand from all that I have just said today is that fasting is in our blood, but it is also in our soul. It is the bridge between the survival instinct that our forefathers had and we still inherited, and the spiritual awakening between the Neolithic or the ones in Sahel caves in Africa to the Nobel Prize-winning laboratories of our modern time. So tell me about it. What are you going to do about this? How can you harness it today? Can fasting actually do what it is said to be in theory? Reverse disease, diabetes, obesity, cancer, Alzheimer's? That's the $1 million question. And that's going to be the focus of part 2. I want you to listen out, because if you are hooked on this, you better subscribe and share. And then I want you to hit on that notification button so that when the next part is brought about, I want you to share it with someone who have tried every diet. There must be somebody you know who have tried every diet under the sun and still have not been able to make a headway. Because next episode, we are going to roll up our sleeves and we are going to turn this theory into action. So until then, I want you to ask yourself, what would your ancestors, what would they do faced with all that we have today? So gentlemen, I thank you for joining me once again. I am still learning. I want to make sure I get it very clear. I'm still learning in this podcast. I've read a lot of comments from people who are watching and some of the things they want me to improve. There is that instinct in me that wants to let you know what the fundamentals are, and I take it as a serious business. Thank you very much for listening to me today.